So what we want to do this time around is to finish up this screen. So I'm going to search for a reservation, and I will choose the 25th and the 26th as my start and end dates, and click on a room. And I want this to disappear, start date and end date, and I want it to appear up here as non-editable text. I also want to display the room name, and finally I want to be able to make the reservation. So let's look at how we're displaying this page right now. Make reservation. So that's the URL, /make reservation. Let's go back to our code and look at our roots and look at make reservation and see what's happening in that particular function. So it looks like what we're doing is creating an empty reservation and then just passing that to the template along with an empty form. Well, we already have a reservation, and that reservation has most of the information we already need. So why don't we do something useful with that instead? Instead of taking it, creating an empty one, let's pull the reservation out of the session. And we did that just a little while ago. So we did that in this function, which is choose room. So let's find that. Here is where we pulled the reservation out of the room, right? Or out of the session, pulled the reservation out of the session. So let's copy that, go back to our make reservation page, get rid of this empty reservation, and instead pull one out of the session. And res will get stored in reservation. And here we can't generate or print an error because we technically don't have one. We just have a true or false for OK. So I'll fix that just by saying errors.new and saying cannot get reservation from, try that again, from session. And you're not supposed to start an error message with a capital letter for reasons I've never understood, but there you go. All right, so that fixes that. Now we have this information. Is that everything we need? Well, let's find out. Let's go over to our make reservation page and see what changes we have to make. Down here, I don't need start date and end date anymore. They have the names of start date and end date. I don't need those. Instead, I want to display them up here, but I still need them in the form. So maybe I'll put them in as hidden fields. Input type equals hidden, name equals start date, and value equals, and what you might be thinking you could do is just this, res.startDate. Because we have the reservation, that should be a period, not a comma. We have the reservation, we got it right here. We pulled it out of our data variable from the template data, and we know it's a reservation, and we can just display reservation start date. You might think that, but you'd be wrong. I'm going to duplicate this anyway, and just get my end date set up, because I'm going to need those in a minute. And this would be end date, but that won't work. And it won't work because, don't forget, if you look at template, or look at the models, let's open that up, models.go, and you look at a reservation, start date and end date aren't in the right format. They are stored in whatever Go uses for time.time. So they won't display in the format that I need them to display in, which is 4-digit year hyphen 2-digit month hyphen 2-digit day. So what we need to do is effectively the reverse of what we did some time ago. And that is to take a time and cast it back into a string in the format we want. And fortunately, that's really easy. So at this point, I've pulled my res out of the session. That's my reservation. So I'm going to say SD for start date is assign the value of res.startDate. And then I'll just call the format function, which is built right into the time.time, and give it the correct layout. And if you'll recall, this is the correct layout. So that should give me the year, the month, and the day. And I can duplicate that and do the same thing for end date, which I'll call ED. Change this to end date. Try that again. End date. Now I have them in strings. But how do I get them from here down to here? I could stick them in data. That would work. But we already, if you look at the template data, we have this string map in the format, in our type of template data, we have a string map. So let's use that. So go back to here. I'll create a string map, which I'll call string map. I will assign that the value of make map string. And then I just assign my start date and end date to it. So I'll say string map start date is equal to SD, and string map end date is equal to ED. And then I just pass my string map as part of my template data. Because that type is already there, we've already added that to the type template data, and we just put our string map in there. All right, so I have that. Now, let's go back to our reservation page and display some information. So right now, I can just say in a new paragraph, now it comes after reservation details, I'll use this existing paragraph. I'll put a line break there, and I'll just say arrival, and then print out from my string map index.stringMap, which has a capital M, and I called it start_date, and I'll copy this whole thing because I'm going to use it in a minute, and put a line break there, and I'll replace the start date in here with what I just copied. And we'll do the same thing for the end date, which I'm going to call departure. And I'll paste that and change this to end date and paste it in here. Actually, I'll just copy the whole thing because I don't remember if I copied the curly brackets or not. And this way I know I'm getting the right thing. And paste it in there. The other thing that we had was a hidden field down here for room ID. And room ID is hard-coded to 1, which isn't very helpful for us. Fortunately, that's not hard to change either. So I'm going to change my room ID from the hard-coded value of 1 to, from my reservation variable, which I got right here, dot room ID. So if I save that and go back, stop my application, so I'll clear this, clear the screen, I'll stop my application, clear the screen, run my application, and go back to my web browser and start the whole process over. So click on Make Reservation Now, choose, and remember the dates I'm choosing, 25th and 26th, searching. I'm going to choose Major Suite, which I know is ID 2. I can see that right down in the lower left-hand corner of the window. And there it is. So it shows me reservation details. Arrival, there's a date, and I could use whatever format I wanted there. If I wanted to make it Thursday, the 25th of November 2020, I can format that using my format string in my handler. And there's my departure, that's correct. I have a room ID as a hidden field. Let's make sure. So let's find room ID. There it is, ID 2. All of that is correct. The one thing that's missing at this point is the name of the room. And although technically this will work without it, it would be really helpful if I could display the room name at the very top, say between the title and the arrival date. Can I do that? Well, let's go look at our model. So what we have in the actual models, let me hide this, is I have under a reservation, I have the ID, the first name, the last name, the email, the phone, the start date, the room ID. I don't have a room name, but I do have this type room, which is of type models.room right here, and I'm not using it. And I know the name of the room at one point during this entire process. So is it possible that I could populate just the room name field of this room type, named room, and then draw it out in my template? I think it is. Let's figure out where we could put that. So let's think about the process. When I click on the room, I am clicking on choose room right here, right? Choose room right here. Is it in there? Let's find out. In here, I get the room ID, and then I have a reservation, which I pull from the session. So nope, don't have it at this point. At no point in this process do I have the name of the room. I have it back when I'm searching. So if we go back here and say search availability, when I post it, I have it right here, but I don't know which room they're going to choose. So it seems to me like we're going to have to write another database function to actually go get a room by ID. Unfortunately, that's really easy. So let's go over to our, where is it here? It's under internal, repository, postgres.go. Right here. So what I'm going to have to do is to write a new function. And I'm going to have to write a function that gets a room by ID. So I will call this func with a receiver of type Postgres, DB repo. I'll say get room by ID. That'll be the name of the function, which seems to make sense because that's precisely what I'm trying to do. And it's going to take one parameter, which I'll call ID, of type int, and it will return a models.room, and it potentially will return an error. So, as I usually do, I'm not going to type out this context stuff because I almost always get it wrong. I will copy and paste it, and I'll declare a new variable, var room of type models.room. Then I'll write a query. My query is going to be equal to, in backticks, just so I can format it however I want, select. And what's in our room table? Well, let's not guess. Let's go look. So I will just pull up my Postico right here, go to rooms, and look at the structure. ID, room name, created at, updated at. Couldn't be simpler. Let's go back. Select ID, room name, created at, updated at, from rooms, where ID equals $1. That's my query. And since I'm only getting one row, I may as well use the query row context. So row is assigned the value of m.db.queryRowContext, which takes the context, which I have at the very top of this function, and my query, and my arguments, my one placeholder, which is called ID, which I receive as a parameter right up here. And then I actually get my error when I try to scan this row, row.scan, and I scan it into a variable that I've declared up here but haven't done anything with yet. So I'll put ampersand, you got to use a reference to it. Room.id is my first one. Room.name is my room name, which is my second one. And then room.createdAt and room.updatedAt. There. So now I have this. I need to check for my error. If error is not equal to nil, then what do? I return my variable, room, and the error. Otherwise, I return my room and nil because there was no error. And that should do it. Let's give this a comment. Gets a room by ID. And then we need to put this in our repository. So let's get back there, which is under Postgres. We need to copy this, paste it into our repository so it becomes available. Make sure everything compiles. It does. Good. Okay, I'll stop the application. And now let's go use this. So back in our handlers, which are right here, when do I want to use this? I want to use this just before I display the make reservation page. So let's go back to our roots to get back to the function right here. At this point, I know the reservation ID. I know everything I need to know. All I have to do is to look up the room and store its name in the appropriate location in my reservation. So what I can do here is actually just say, now that I have my reservation, I can say room or error is assigned the value of m.db.getRoomById and pass it res.roomId. So now I have, if this works, as I hope it will, I will have everything about that room stored in this variable, and potentially I have an error. So I got to check for that. If error is not equal to nil, helpers.serverError w error return. Otherwise I have it, and I can just, in my reservation, I can store the room name. So I can say res.room.roomName equals room.roomName. And now I've populated that variable, which is of type models.reservation. I've populated its member, room, which is of type models.room. I've only populated one field, but that's all I care about right now. So I'll just store that in there, and we should be good to go because I put this variable in the session down here. So if I go back to the make reservation page, now at the very top, I can say room, and I can just go res, which I'm going to have to move something in a second, but don't worry, I will. res.room.roomName. And I can't call this yet, and actually this helpfully underlines it in red showing me, because I don't actually declare this variable until later. So let's just cut that and move it right up here. And now that won't be an issue anymore. And I need to put a carriage return after this, otherwise these will be on the same line, so I'll put a line break there. And now I should be able to stop the application, which is already stopped, run it again, and try this one more time. So let's go back here and start over from the home page and choose Make Reservation Now and search for availability. So I'll go the 26th to the 27th this time. Search, choose the major suite, and it shows me the room is the major suite. Perfect. Now let's make sure the last part works. So I'll put Mary Jones, mary@jones.com, and some phone number. And make the reservation. And hopefully we haven't broken anything. Looks good. We're going to have to change this, of course, the reservation summary page, to include the room, to include the arrival date, and include the departure date, but that should be trivial. All right, we'll take care of that last step and a few other minor things that we need to think about. For example, when I'm searching for a reservation, should I be able to choose a date in the past? Probably not. Unless time travel has recently been invented, that's probably a very bad idea. So I should modify this calendar such that no date before either today or tomorrow or whatever we decide the first date should be is even selectable. And then we're also going to want to probably put server-side validation in to make sure that they didn't turn off JavaScript, manually type in a date in the past but in the correct format, and then submit the page. So we're going to want to take care of that as well. But these are minor things. They're easy to clean up. And we'll take care of that in the next lecture or two.